Welcome to Windows on the World, following on from last week's show where we exposed climate change catastrophophobia. We're going to carry on now this week with the sustainable extinction. We're going to talk about fake news, fake protest, fake politics, and even a bit of fake law. Now, I've got another talk coming up which is going to run alongside our talks, The Bigger Picture. And it's based on an article and show we did some time ago called Are You a Pauper?, which goes into how we are controlled, why we are controlled, and who did it and when. Very interestingly, it comes from the Poor Laws. So do look at that, because I'm going to be putting together a talk which is based on this, which will run alongside the talks that we're doing already. Myself, Piers Corbyn and Sandy Adams. Our next talks are going to be at Lytham St Anne's, which is up near Blackpool, and we're going to be there on the 18th of November, all afternoon. Go to New Horizons, Lytham, just put that into your Google search, or go to windowsontheworld.net. Now, this week we're going to talk, as I say, about the incredible amount of fake news, the new fake protests, fake politics, and a bit of fake law. But first of all, I wanted to start off with a quote which was sent to me by a regular contributor to the show, and it's by Marshall McLuhan. And the quote states, "Only the small secrets need to be protected. The large ones are kept secret by public incredulity." Now that's actually an incredible statement. So this is a fella who knew a lot about propaganda. And he died in 1980. He was a Canadian professor, philosopher and public intellectual, and his work is one of the cornerstones of the study of media theory. So he should know. This is absolutely brilliant stuff, because it perfectly describes what was really behind major events and the way the public have this cognitive dissonance and fear of the actual truth. And we see this in a lot of the so-called alternative media, which I do not consider Windows on the World to be a part of. I don't consider it to be a part of anything. It's on its own. Basically, I've found that as people who listen to this show are individuals doing their own thing, possibly collectively. And that's something I also bring into the talk, which is extremely important. But this fella actually came up with some incredible and ahead of his time ideas. He stated that he's known actually for coining the expression, "the medium is the message," and the term global village, and for predicting the World Wide Web almost 30 years before it was invented. He was a fixture in media discourse in the late 1960s, though his influence began to wane in the 1970s. In the years after his death, he continued to be a controversial figure in academic circles. With the arrival of the internet and the World Wide Web, interest was renewed in his work and perspective. So that's really interesting. I'm going to look more into Marshall McLuhan, because in order to know what's going on, it's often a good idea to have a look at the past, because a lot of this stuff was predicted. We talk about that. We talk about Dr. Richard Day and his talk at Mount Sinai Hospital. Take a look at that one, Social Engineers Then and Now, because a lot of the things that are happening now have been absolutely predicted. Monthly Blimpton's just said that was a good programme, the Pauper one. It was actually. There's so much information in there, and sometimes when I do this, I'm thinking, can I keep the ideas fresh? And we usually manage to. There's always a lot to cover. But what I like to do is go into the depth of what's behind things, the actual agenda, because to me that's much more important. So anyway, carrying on to this week's show, I've got a quote here which is really, really funny. The Apollo 17 moonwalker Harrison Schmitt rejects the UN climate report. Now that's a good thing, isn't it? The bad thing about it, though, is that he's alleged to have walked on the moon, which is a bit of cognitive dissonance for people who listen to this show, really. So the observations that we make as geologists, he say, do not show any evidence that human beings are causing this. Well, he's right about that. So which bit is true? That he went to the moon, or that global warming is a racket? Or should we call it globalist warming? Mr. Piers has just walked into Windows Towers. Mr. Piers Corbyn, that is. And Yes, we're going to be talking about many things tonight, including the Losers' March. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the Losers' March yesterday, which is actually being touted as a Winners' March, but the winners have already won, I thought. I suppose that the way things are in the post-truth world, you can have the same result twice. Well, at least I know that one of them is true, you see. One of them is true. This is the thing about this. Piers, I was just saying that Apollo 17 moonwalker Harrison Schmitt rejects UN climate report. But the point is that he's alleged to have walked on the moon. So, which part of his observations are true, you see, or which part of our observations about him are true?
Well, it's interesting he's speaking out now, because everything he knows about climate change, or the moon come to that, but everything he knows about climate change has been rubbish. He's known for a long time. So why is he saying it now? Is it because the current president is enabling such things to come out? I don't know.
That's a very good point, Piers, and that's exactly the kind of conversation I was expecting to get us going, you see. But carrying on from that swiftly, Al Gore says we are running out of time, or I think more likely that he's running out of steam. What do you think on that?
Yeah, he's running out of steam and time. He still hasn't moved his house from being by the sea, which is imminently going to be flooded over his property. So we know he's a liar. Yes, I think what's happening now over the latest pronouncements, which is called SR15, is that they know they have run out of time and steam. So their latest pronouncement is saying that a so-called 1.5 degrees centigrade rise in temperature is deadly dangerous, whereas before it was 2 degrees. So they've lowered it to increase the imminent danger level to try and get people more excited. However, this isn't working, and more people are seeing through it. I mean, this is the most desperate, insane, dishonest claim ever made about climate, and is equalled only by the United Nations Weapons of Mass Destruction pack of lies, which was used to justify the Iraq War. This is another thing from the same stable. It's a weapons of climate destruction.
Well, I have to concur with that, because that has been the subject of our last couple of shows, which you can find on YouTube, but more specifically, and please go there, Spreaker.com. Go to windowsontheworld.net/live shows, and they're all there. The whole archive is there. And what's great about the archive on Spreaker is that I know people are still listening to shows that went out months and months ago, which is fantastic, because I get sort of daily updates on the figures there. Actually, I wanted to thank a few people who've supported us over the years and recently tonight, because I don't usually do this, but I think I should. I'd like to thank shawllady.com for helping us out, Martin Gara, Dorothy Jansen especially. Dorothy has just appeared recently. Stephen O'Neill, of course, who helped us put on our talk in Glastonbury. So if you're listening, sorry, not Glastonbury, Bristol. That was the one after, wasn't it?
It was.
Yes, the Bristol talk. So Stephen put on that with his girlfriend down there in Bristol.
Amazing cafe.
And the amazing cafe, the Ark in Bristol, which is next door to a Palestinian museum, which is actually, I suppose, what could you say about that? Palestinian museum. Well, Palestine is
they should have a museum in many places.
That's right.
And this is one of them where they've got one.
Exactly. I'd like to thank Mick Hughes, Norma Buddle, Robert Hutchins and David Cherrett. David supported us for quite some time. And these are people who listen to the show, and sometimes they help with donations, which is great. And if you can help us, please do, because it helps us get out and about, and it helps us to pioneer the truth. So I just thought I'd start off the next part with something that came into my mind about the present paradigm, that it's easy to fool the public. Now, I was once in a bank in Walthamstow, and a man sort of jumped the queue and he pointed something in a bag at the cashier and said, "Give me all the money, lady, or I will shoot." So she threw loads of money out to him. And there was a 5-year-old kid next to me, and he said, "That's just a pipe in a plastic bag." Now, my point is here, yeah? So the kid had not been tainted by fear. And he actually observed correctly what was going on. But everyone else crapped themselves, basically, yeah? Because through conditioning. So the 5-year-old kid said, that's a pipe in a plastic bag. But everyone else saw it as a huge threat, you see, which is exactly how propaganda works, isn't it?
It is. That is how propaganda works. And the public are right now being brainwashed about the European Union, although the majority of the public see through that, and about climate change.
Yeah, well, as I said, good analogy. The descent into ignorance, the fall of man, the use of the word journalist, and the over-empowered voice of those with nothing to say. This is a bit of what we're going to get into tonight. Now, I once told a change agent the truth, right? And the change agent then turned around and said, "I choose not to hear that." So, you see, truth is very selective, isn't it? It can be selected. And I think that's what we're going through at the moment, as we call it, the post-truth world. Now, is the new form of mind control this? It's "I choose not to hear this." I think that is the new form of mind control. It's selective hearing. Now, I first came across this statement a few years ago when I gave some factual information to this evangelical climate change catastrophobist in Walthamstow. This was interesting because they moved some change agents in to control the narrative to bring in the open concentration camp, which is known as Regeneration and Agenda 21, and of course the Global Village, Sustainable Cities, Walking Cities, and Cycling for All.
That's right, and you can have your say in all of it.
Well, you can.
We won't listen.
That's right. So you've got a bit of news about that, haven't you? Because you went to a consensus meeting the other day, didn't you?
Oh, I did, yes. Continuing on the Old Kent Road. Yes, this is a sort of consultation forum update. And, well, basically I went there with a number of things to say. A hyper-controlled meeting, though, of course. There's already little tables put around for people to sit in separate groups when they deem that they don't want to have a general discussion, which is getting too embarrassing. So I made a point at the start that I objected to them having sent round a email urging people to sign up in a petition to bring in the new Bakerloo line extension down the Old Kent Road. I said, look, there's some people who don't agree with this. Why do you think that you should just tell everybody or invite everybody to sign up to the Bakerloo extension? Because I then said, look, it is known that turkeys do vote for Christmas. And this is what's happening here. It's very obvious that as soon as the Bakerloo extension is opened, if it ever happens, and there are tube stations put there, that will multiply land values by typically 5 or 10-fold. And the local people will be thrown out and socially cleansed, just as they were on the Haygate estate, which is by the Elephant and Castle tube station. Therefore, it's not in our interests, and we don't want this, and we should oppose it absolutely. So they didn't really have much to say, except, lots of people want a new tube line. Well, if you go before people in Lewisham saying you could get to Elephant and Castle quicker, you might do. But when you look at what London Transport's actually doing, they've reduced the number of 53 and 172 buses. Reduced them. And they also complain buses are full. Well, yes, but they're reducing them, presumably to try and get support for their narrative that a new tube line is needed. Another thing they could do is increase the number of they'll have to deal with the rail network, but there's only 5 trains an hour typically that goes on those lines, whereas you could probably have 4 times as that many trains on proper railways if organisation is changed. But I also questioned in other parts of the discussion the whole narrative that they have, namely that they're building super rich flats for money launderers.
Are you talking about affordable housing here, Peter?
No, I'm not. They're talking about so-called affordable housing, which is not affordable. But the whole model they have for London is basically removing the working class from the inner and middle regions, putting in rich and super rich, empty flats, and the people who service this have to travel further and further distances. So you have a more and more mad transport system that buses or trains or tubes people 20 miles typically. And this is actually, in the logical sense, unsustainable, because there's going to be a property crash in due course, and then this whole thing will fail. But they are not even thinking about that. All they're thinking about is the council is just thinking, how can they help the next developer rip up Southwark Moor and chuck people out. I made these points which they didn't like to hear. Then we had a bit of a general discussion after the London Transport gave a very woolly presentation about what they were hoping to do. And there was a lot of hands going up, a lot of people talking. And then all of a sudden, the councillor suddenly said, "Oh, well, we've had enough of this. Now we've got to go into workshops."
We're going to split up into small groups.
Yes, so then everyone can have their say. That's what he said. And I said, "Oh, really?" And there's a lot of people here who've all been making points of relevance to everybody. I think we should hear them. He said, "Oh, no, there's no time for that, no time for that. You've got to have, everyone has to have their say in little groups." Yeah. So anyway, the little groups happened. And the report backs from these little groups were just nonsense, just little snippets of what was said in each little group. In other words, they succeeded in suppressing the debate. Nevertheless, many markers were made. And it's very clear a lot of people are just not happy at all with the council's collusion with developers in the Old Kent Road area or anywhere in particular.
Well, there have been a few kickbacks, haven't there? I mean, there have been moments of optimism in this, but when you see them using what they call Delphi technique, which is a way of controlling group consensus, and them openly going along with it as though it is democratic and we really do want you to have your say. Now, you could argue that this has always been the way. I mean, most people who've been involved with local authorities have always said this sort of thing, but I think now it's like on an industrial scale with a template, isn't it?
It is an industrial scale with a template. You see, in the past, when I was a councillor, 86 to 90, we did, as councillors, we'd have meetings, and then we'd say, look, there's issues here we need to talk about. And issue one might be what to do about rubbish collection on one estate, another issue about school children or something, right?
Yeah.
So we'd say, all right, we will break up into groups on these matters, and the results from each group will be reported back. That's what we do. However, see what the council do here. They don't break up into groups about specific things. They just say they break us up into groups, let everyone talk at once about all sorts of stuff, some of which is, well, it's relevant to the people who raise it, but might not be relevant to everybody. I mean, okay, these things need to be discussed somewhere, but what's the point in coming to a conference to do that? I don't know. But they break you up into groups in order to suppress an overall picture and use their efforts to impose upon people an inevitability. So they say, oh, it's all going to happen. Now you can talk about trivial detail. That's all these groups are for.
Absolutely correct. I can't disagree with any of that, because I've been Delphi'd myself, and I intend not to get Delphi'd again unless I can help it. But we can move on now to the massive losers' march about subverting democracy, which they are calling a people's vote. Now, the fact that an enormous number of people who have little knowledge of what the European Union is about and nothing about its history or what the end game is provides a great example of group no-think, a mob who are mentally subservient and completely unable to think. They are dangerous. But when I saw a photograph of who was leading the flock, I had to admit that it is clear that all life on Earth is facing a crisis. So in that respect, I agree with Al Gore, because at the head of the march...
He was there?
No, listen. Oh, okay. This is why I'm saying that there is a global crisis for this very reason, that at the head of the Losers' March were Peter Tatchell and Eddie Izzard. Now, as I said to Izzard after one of his shows, it's just not funny. Now, this has also been in the recent trial of the 3 climate change promoting activists who have been for some reason treated as heroes. Now, this is very interesting, right? So this form of theatre is very poorly executed, but the cheering congregation believe it. So basically, it's a totally unreal situation. So you've got these like climate change refugees who went on to the fracking circus, who came from the pool of controlled opposition, fake activists and change agents who turned the protest against globalisation into one for the globalists, right? So that was, of course, the Occupy movement, another staged event brought to you by Subversion through Soros. Now, we're not saying that everyone here who protests against fracking is controlled opposition, but they are being led and absolutely controlled into predictable outcomes, a bit like that council meeting, to save the world through taxation and voluntary servitude to global banking interests. That's who they're working for. Now, as we said on our last show, the globalists need the controlled opposition of anti-globalists to carry out their looting scam and keep the population looking the wrong way and distracted into issues of no importance. And I stated that in our climate catastrophophobia show last week, but the anti-globalists, with nothing to do, congregate, and someone has to lead them, and that is the globalists. Now, do you think anyone's ever going to wake up to this? Because you've been involved in sort of protests for a long time, haven't you? But the way I see this controlled opposition stuff, it's just is a pantomime to me. Especially this fracking, because I know for a fact that the fake activists who took down Occupy went straight into fracking, and that was years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, because things like fracking, there's other reasons other than the climate so-called crisis to be concerned. I mean, one is about water poisoning. But, leaving that aside, you're right that there's all sorts of fake activists going into these type of movements. And I think on the European Union march yesterday, interestingly, of course, it was billed of a completely vague agenda, like we must have our say. And, of course, the Labour Party's made it clear that there can't be another vote on whether or not we leave. That has been decided. And the only vote could be on the type of leaving. Now, the Remainists, of course, want what we would call Brexit in name only, BRINO, where, like Theresa May said, oh yes, we'll leave, but we're going to keep all the European Union regulations imposed upon us. Yeah. Well, that is Brexit in name only. So that is what she is after. Now, people on the march, I would say, I don't know if they know what they want, but a lot of them do believe in the European Union and are real Remainists and want a vote on the to happen again. Now, I don't think the hard Remainists actually want to have a new vote because they know they would lose big time. And furthermore, MPs who started backing it would lose the next election because the great majority of the country is for Brexit, and the Remainists are concentrated in very small geographical areas, namely London and Bristol. Now, they could even swing to be more Remains, but they would still lose in terms of constituencies, so that the MPs concerned would get trounced. So what they want to do is raise the temperature towards a new referendum, but not have one. And in the meantime, use this to get some sort of Brexit in name only. And I think your point, Mark, about people not knowing what the European Union is about is very important, because they don't. A lot of these people on the march think, oh, European Union is somehow nice, isn't it? We've all got to hold hands.
We're all part of a global family.
We're part of something bigger, yes.
The global family.
Of course. And you might not be able to travel abroad.
Do you want to stop hungry musicians coming here? Is that that's what you want, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Right.
I thought so.
People that are saying this stuff, they just don't know what has actually happened in the north of England. I mean, the north of England, there's vast numbers of people on 0 hours contracts. Destruction of industry, aided and abetted consciously by the European Union. Jobs moved out to India. And you've paid for this, and it's all done under the name of the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme, so-called, i.e. reduce CO2. All you've had is reducing CO2 here and moving CO2 production to somewhere else. But it's a job destruction exercise, and that's what the European Union has done to the north of England. Now, people that are marching in London thinking they're saving the right to travel to France or something, well, there's always going to be a right to travel to France, and nothing will change on any of those things. But they're being hoodwinked into aiding and abetting the destruction of industry and fishing in Britain. And I think you have to understand what the European Union is about, what it's about and how it's been sold. You see, it's set up as a operation whereby the super corporations can exploit this limited region of the earth, namely the European Union, take jobs out of it, reduce wages, and so on, and do deals with it from outside. And this is only going to be doable by super rich corporations. Now, it's sold to the working class of Europe on the back of the social chapter, i.e., are we doing good things for people? We make sure there's rules, regulations, trade union protection and so on. Now, that's how it's been sold. But of course, the claims are not true. Just look what happened to Greece. People were eating grass in Greece, and that wasn't saving anybody. So
they conveniently leave all this out, though, don't they? Which is what I really can't understand this. That's why I brought up this fracking thing, because what we've got is these controlled narratives going on, of course, you know. So it's fake activism. I'm not saying everyone who's there is fake, but I'm saying it's being controlled. It's being controlled by the globalists. So I'll just reiterate that statement.
Most people marching believe they're saving something good.
Yeah, but the anti-globalists with nothing to do congregate, and someone has to lead them, and that is the globalists. That is so true. We brought that up last week. But see, one of this entitled mob described sort of this fracking thing of hanging around and booing at lorries, which is what you see on the television, right? As a part of the suffragette movement.
Oh, right.
And I would like to suggest that Emily Pankhurst would probably disagree. What do you think about that? Do you think she'd agree or disagree?
Well, I think she'd disagree completely. I
Yes.
mean, some of her friends died to get the vote.
It's not being a student and booing at lorries, is it?
No,
what they were
no.
doing, really.
They wanted the vote for women to have their actual say. But you see, they also accepted the democratic process. Like when you have a vote, that is decided and you move on. Because this European Union revote movement is very, very, very fundamentally anti-democratic. Because it's saying...
Well, is that by definition?
By definition. We've had a vote, it was decided, all sides said this was the vote, the final vote, there won't be another vote, and now because they lost, they're saying we want another vote. Well, that's just hypocrisy. But look, you look down the road a bit further, countries where this type of thing happens on a regular basis are, for example, the Congo. They have elections, they have a result, the other side say it's unfair, then they start the civil war again. That carries on, then they have another election, have another vote, and then they have another civil war. So it goes on and on and on, as long as people don't accept that at some point, if they're going to have a ballot box, they have to accept what the ballot box says, and, go to another ballot on something else later on if they have something to do. But you can't reverse, you can't accept some type of democracy and not another. See, one of the main movers on this European Union happy-clappy nonsense yesterday, the Losers' March, was the Green Party. Well, the Green Party are very keen on local votes, referendums, local votes on and so forth on against social cleansing. i.e., we've got to have ballots. No, that's very good. They're promoting ballots. Excellent. But you see, when it comes to the biggest ballot of all, they're opposing it. Now, that just makes no sense. I mean, what are they doing? They're selectively supporting democracy in one place, not another. And you can't argue somehow that the referendum was unfair. I mean, obviously this thing's going to be said by both sides, which are questionable, but the actual referendum was funded mainly by Goldman Sachs, and the Remainers spent 2 or 3 times more than the Leavers. So you can't even say it was biased against biased towards Leave. It wasn't. It was biased the other way in terms of finances and propaganda. So what are they saying?
Well, what they are saying, and they keep saying, is that the Leave campaign broke the law. Now we're talking about
Really?
it was about this couple of $100,000, wasn't it?
Well, they
but the
probably
point
all broke
is
the
that
law.
a leaflet was put through everybody's letterbox telling them to stay.
Yeah, from the government.
Yes, from the government.
I remember reading it. It
Yeah.
was full of crap, and people still didn't stay.
Exactly. So let's get on to the New York Times now. It continues its fairy stories. This is really funny. And it was obviously written by someone who's terminally lazy-brained, right? And it basically says, major climate report describes a strong risk of crisis as early as 2040. Of course, they have to keep putting it in the future.
That's later.
Well, yeah, but the phrase apocalypse now doesn't
happened already.
The phrase apocalypse now is not really in the
no
vocabulary.
No snow by 2010, they told us.
Yeah. The latest Catastrophobia article shows a child playing with the dead bones of a cow. And it must have died in a drought brought on by Al Gore, right? It has to have done.
Okay.
As a psychological operation to distract the world from drowning polar bears. It's quite incredible, this, right? Because the New York Times pushes this stuff relentlessly. And they're the ones who are saying that the sea is rising. Basically, it's not. Actually, New York Harbour is sinking because of all the building on it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So there you go. Researchers from Washington State University says have published a new report on the Great Drought, the most destructive known drought of the past 800 years, and how it sparked the global famine that claimed the lives of 50 million people. They're not saying when it is. The scientists warn that the Earth's current warming climate could spark a similar drought, but even worse. Now, climate conditions, it says, that caused the Great Drought and global famine arose from natural variability. Well, so if it arose from natural variability, how the hell can we do anything about it?
Yeah. Well, it's nonsense. Oh, they also say, scientists say, but you see, it isn't that. It's a journalist made it up. That's what it is. And then of course, the IPCC has been caught quoting journalists making things up, putting those in the UN report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and making them become fact. And that their stuff about glaciers shrinking on the Himalayas and so on were complete fiction, created and conjured up as fact in that manner. I mean, I think whenever you hear any propagandist talking about some of these things, you can identify what's nonsense, because basically they put forward a word salad of things like future generations, regeneration, sustainability,
diversity,
having your say,
vibrant
diversity, vibrant communities, absolutely. These words come along, jumbled up, and it happened at this Old Kent Road thing, just the same, every time, in a manner which is actually meaningless. And of course, sustainability always comes along. What it means in practice is anything they choose it to mean.
Exactly, it's anything you want it to be. Because it's all sustainable unless it's unsustainable. And anything that's unsustainable is what they don't want, which is basically your rights.
That's right.
Your rights are
be
unsustainable. Of course not. They can't be sustained.
No.
So it says that WSU says global famine was among the worst humanitarian disasters in modern time, comparable to the influenza epidemic of 1918 to 1990. Now, what's that got to do with global warming, right? What's the flu epidemic got to do with what they're talking about, with the weather? It didn't have anything to do. All right, it might spread quicker in certain weather conditions. However,
more people died in that flu epidemic than were killed in the First World War.
That's right.
Which is astounding, but that is a fact.
I think so. The message here is get your flu shot and stop global warming now.
Oh, right.
That's the message there.
Well, I'm against flu shots myself. I think people should have more vitamin C and a healthy diet and get a bit of exercise, and then they'll find they won't get flu anyway.
I think that's very sound advice from Dr. Corbyn there. Now, keeping the agenda very simple for a change and ever so repetitive, it's essential, right? So, creating bigger division, the real reasons for actions taken are always hidden from the public narrative. That's the next thing I wanted to get onto. Think tank alert, basically, yeah? So, a year-long project of More in Common, it's called. Have you noticed that all these think tanks
that sounds so nice.
and lobbying groups, they're all about the common interest, the More in Common. In other words, that we control a very narrow corridor of opinion, and you all have to jump inside of it. And anyone outside is an outlier, you see.
Oh, and we want more involvement. We're all for resident involvement.
That's right.
And when you hear that, it means we don't want you.
However, this was launched in October 2018. It's brand new. It's called More in Common, and it's a close relation of the globalist agenda and the Atlantic Council. And they put out a thing called hiddentribes.us. Now, if they were hidden, then they wouldn't have a voice, really, would they? So
No.
that's slightly contradictory, but it says, More in Common is a new international initiative set up in 2017 to build communities, it's only just come out now, and societies that are stronger, more united and more resilient to the increasing threats of polarisation and social division. Now what that means is just putting everyone into the narrow opinion corridor so they control the agenda. It's a bit like Delphi technique, isn't it? So we can talk about something else, we'll put it out for consensus at one of our general assemblies, or send our future leaders to the fracking protest to gain publicity for the UN agenda, which the public have been told is a conspiracy theory, but which is written into local government policy, right? All we need to do is get some university clone to jump on a lorry. See, I keep bringing up that fracking thing, but it's quite important, this, right? Because
outside a
exactly.
power station
But
or whatever, yeah.
this is the whole point, right? And it says in this thing, our approach is to develop and deploy positive narratives that tell a new story of us, in inverted commas, celebrating what we all have in common rather than what divides us. Now, guess what they're going to do? Control the agenda. So this means getting change agents to control the narrative of public opinion by giving a narrow group of pre-selected subjects which steer the diverse and vibrant community into group consensus. It's called getting what you have been given, right? So it says they want to connect people on a large scale and across lines of difference through events and campaigns, which means controlling all narratives through political correctness, basically. That's what they're doing, yeah? So this is just a good example, Piers, because there's so many of these lobbying groups and think tanks. But it says here, America has never felt so divided. Bitter debates that were once confined to congressional hearings and cable TV have now found their way into every part of our lives, from our Facebook feeds to the family dinner table. But most Americans are tired of this us versus them mindset and are eager to find common ground. Now, that's absolutely not true, because what they're doing is they're creating a divide and rule between the extreme left and what they're calling the right. So that's absolute rubbish.
They're promoting fake conflicts everywhere.
Absolutely. So this is about bringing the fake conflict into political correctness to cure it, basically. This is the message we've heard from more than 8,000 Americans, it says, in one of our country's largest ever studies of polarisation. We hold dissimilar views on many issues. However, more than 3 in 4 Americans also believe that our differences aren't so great that we can't work together. Now, most people wouldn't say that they're not going to agree with something that could actually get a solution, are they? So what they've done is a fake narrative.
Do you agree with motherhood and apple pie or not?
It's like the
Do you agree with motherhood and apple pie?
Well, actually,
you do. Yes. Okay. We've got
think
something
so.
in common.
But
fantastic.
I think both of those are very good things. But the point here is, it says basically a nation divided, you see. It says a nation divided. A range of major issues split the country, and here's what they are, because they've dictated what the major issues are, right? Which is what they always do, right? So
what are the major issues?
These are what they want
America,
to
then?
create as the main points, which are conflict issues, right? Immigration, white privilege, sexual harassment, and Islamophobia. Now, don't you think that that's slightly contrived? Because this white privilege thing, whenever you see that, you know what's behind it, right? But the thing is, Piers, right?
They're going to claim
they missed out something very, very important, Cycling. They missed out. How can they miss out cycling? I just don't get it.
America's a bit big to do cycling in, you see, so I think it doesn't work.
Well, no, we're building walkable cities, Piers, all over the world. Haven't you heard of the Habitat Conference?
You see, look, I think you just think about that list. Well, there's something completely missing on there. Jobs.
Yes.
Jobs.
Exactly.
And people actually having pride and respect in communities. These things are gone, right? They've been destroyed 24/7 by the globalist agenda.
I think most people are worried about the roof over their head in America, aren't they, really? I don't think they're worried about immigration, white privilege, sexual harassment and Islamophobia.
Truly affordable housing. Look, I'm campaigning for housing at cost. It's also known as council housing. It's a good idea, but it's the last thing they're going to put forward. So this list of agreeable things, you see, they're kind of abstract things that people can go on about forever. But We want practical things.
Well, we do,
Jobs
but
and homes.
the powers that be don't see. It says more in common as
and also food that's safe to eat.
Correct.
Instead of GM modified stuff full of chemicals.
More in Common has already established national hubs in the UK, US, France and Germany, and has published early findings from our first stages of work. Now, these are the only things focused on by the public relations orientated media, aren't they? So, in other words, all this stuff is just being put in to the media and every other outlet. So it's like a trivia factory. It keeps churning out the same thing. And once it has been injected into the mainstream, I mean, how many LBGTQ stories dominate the airwaves? You know, I mean, it's like it's compulsory now to wear a badge saying that you don't discriminate against it. You know, it's like a sort of negative form of programming.
Is a discriminatory
Exactly.
badge anyway. What about people who don't wear the badge? Oh my goodness!
What about people who don't discriminate against anything? You know.
Oh my God.
I mean, what could you have a badge for that? But who are they?
A badge against discrimination.
So let's have a look at this block. More in Common, yeah? So guess what? I've just looked at their team, and you know what they have in common? They are ex-employees of Google, the United Nations and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Oh, no.
Yes! And this guy, Thorsten Benner, is co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute in Berlin, and his areas of interest include international organisations focusing on the United Nations peace and security, data and technology politics, and the interplay of the US, Europe and non-Western powers in the making of global disorder, it says here. It's got in brackets disorder. But And he's also on the German Council of Foreign Relations. Now, that's just an example. Right, one of them says she's worked at Google, Change.org, and in US military intelligence. Now, this is my point, right? That it
US military intelligence.
Yeah, it goes back into the military-industrial complex at all points, and a lot of the stuff we're getting from MI5 and MI6. And if you look at the history of those organisations, they've been subverting democracy for a very long time, you know. And it's all globalist fakery, you know. Like, but another one though, Antifa have issued another threat from their parents' house, right? It says, this is only the beginning. Antifa vandalises New York City Republican Club. In a gesture that was intended to put New York City Republicans on notice, members of Antifa vandalised the Metropolitan Republican Club building located on New York City's Upper East Side, breaking windows and doors and defacing the facade with anarchist symbols, according to the New York Times. The vandals declared that the attack was related to a planned appearance by Gavin McInnes, the founder of Proud Boys, a conservative group that has publicly battled with leftist groups at rallies, protests and demonstrations across the US. Now, this is basically the Hegelian dialectic, isn't it? You've got that going on. But wait a minute. What has Antifa got to do with being an anarchist, right? That just doesn't make any sense, because anarchist means small or self-governance. These people are a mob who work as a collective unit without a brain.
I mean, the Democrat Party doesn't describe itself as anarchist in any way.
I know. So you've got to keep the left-right distraction going for the global interests, you see. But members of the club were shocked at the unprovoked act of vandalism, with the president of the club saying it didn't want to be a part of helping the vandals get their message out. Well, nobody wants their building to have a big anarchy sign sprayed on it. I mean, usually the only people who do that are undercover police in this country. I don't know. So basically, well, who wants a load of overprivileged losers spraying anarchy signs? You know, it is an affront to anarchism, though. Which is an intellectual movement for those who do not subscribe to mass dumbing down and collectivism of the hive mind. But it carried on. I cannot recall seeing anything like this, said Ed Cox, chairman of the Republican Party in New York State. He told the New York Times. Shane Goldmasher. Whoever these people are, we don't want to be a part of getting their message out. They don't deserve it. Now, it's kind of funny that they've changed it into like, we don't want to be a part of getting their message out. It's like saying that, I didn't. Well, it's about saying I didn't want to be burgled. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't. It's just a really stupid thing to say. Oh, so yeah, just incredible stuff. That the intolerance of the new Bolsheviks is like a robot army, and there is no reasoning with a computer program. You get crap in and crap out. So they're incapable of debate, basically. Now, useful tools of the globalists are being indoctrinated in radical extremist environments such as schools and universities. This is the problem, you see, innit? The propaganda. And now, get this, Piers. Facebook really is finished. Tech giant hires Nick Clegg as head of global affairs.
What?
Yes.
Nick Clegg?
Yes.
Well, he's the king of all losers. I mean, my God.
Facebook has hired the former UK Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg as its head of global affairs and communications, as the company faces increased pressure over the handling of data and fake news on its platform. Now, if anybody knows about fake news, it's him, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, he promised things and always did the opposite. We're there to fight the Tories, and then he carries out what they want.
Exactly. Says
we're never going to impose student fees or whatever, and then they did exactly that.
He says he spent much of his post-parliamentary career campaigning against Brexit and will now move to Silicon Valley, California, replacing Elliot Schrage, who in June announced that he was leaving the company. The former MP had reportedly spent months trying to woo Facebook chief executive Mark Zuckerberg. In November last year, Clegg issued a passionate defence of the company from unfair criticism by news organisations and ulterior motives. Well, it's great that he's gone.
But I'd love to see him out of this country.
Well, it's great, isn't it? But it's bad news that he's responsible for anything,
but look,
even Facebook.
This spells the end of Facebook. I mean, putting the king of losers in charge of trying to stop it losing is a bad move.
But Piers, there's a very beautiful song, and it says, "Every loser wins."
Really?
Yeah. Haven't you heard that one?
No, I haven't heard that one. Are you going to sing it now?
No, not now. We haven't got
come
time.
on. Well, come on.
It's 21:46. We've got no time for trivia. Now, the facilitation of useful idiots. The council. This is great. That the Atlantic Council. I was getting onto this because they've got
a losers' union.
A losers' union.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just
Maybe
trying to think
Facebook
about it.
Could start one.
Yeah, a losers' union.
Headed by Nick Clegg. and the key bureaucrats in the European Union, who are unelected and unaccountable, of course.
What, Juncker and Clegg?
Yeah, Juncker and Clegg. Juncker and Clegg, losers' union executive.
Yes. Well, I suppose Nick Clegg
assisted by Theresa May.
He could accompany Juncker to an AA meeting.
Showpiece.
Yeah. Could accompany Juncker to an AA meeting, I suppose. Facilitation of useful idiots, yeah. This is the Atlantic Council, right? It says it promotes constructive leadership and engagement in international affairs based on the Atlantic community's central role in meeting global challenges. This is I think it's very important to focus on.
What is the Atlantic community?
Well, exactly, because a community is what they define it as, you see. The community is their target audience.
Yeah.
So basically, the Council provides an essential forum for navigating the dramatic economic and political changes defining the 21st century by informing and galvanising its uniquely influential network of global leaders. Now, this is my point, right? That all of these people who are getting put into these key positions are being trained by these organisations, these lobby groups. I mean, we weren't going to talk about him, but I will bring it up. This Chuka Ramona has just been made head of this other think tank. You know, getting 450 quid an hour. You know,
that's not a real name, is it?
Well, his name's Chuka Harrison Ramona, actually. So I think
okay.
he was more known as Chuka Harrison. Which it's interesting actually because his grandfather was a judge at Nuremberg. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, and basically. His grandfather also had connections with the MI5 spies.
Okay.
It's very, very interesting.
Well, you need to be
the MI5 Cambridge spies.
Yeah.
Now, this is very interesting because it ties everything together, because I think these people are actually put in there with the help of the intelligence services. They have to be, because people like him, right, he's the most unpopular MP that I've ever come across. There are a few others, but I've been to his constituency. Nobody likes him or knows how he got there. Mm-hmm. And all he does is join these kind of lobbying groups.
He got selected by some process, but it must have been a pretty low participation process.
But I was just looking at this. This is funny, actually, because you get these organisations that run loads of things like that Habitat, Nobody even knows about them, and their videos get about 30 hits on YouTube. And then you've got these kind of think tanks, how it all links in. So you've got, basically, on YouTube, it had 3,000 or 4,000 views. This is about the Atlantic Council, and it says about itself, the Council provides an essential forum for navigating the dramatic economic and political changes defining the 21st century by informing and galvanising its uniquely influential network of global leaders. Right? So it's just a change agent organisation.
So what are these big issues? What do they define as the big issues which are shaping the 21st century?
Well, what they define as the big issues are the things that we've been talking about, which is the divide and rule strategies, and especially things like global warming, policy. So on YouTube, their video had 7 likes and 11...
in fact, fake stories.
Yes, on YouTube it had 7 likes and 11 dislikes. and had also disabled comments on it, right? So this is the really funny thing about these things. So you find out that these hugely influential lobbying organisations, they have no public support.
No.
Which is quite interesting, isn't it? Now, through the papers we write, it says, the ideas we generate and the communities we build, the council shapes policy choices and strategies to create a more secure and prosperous world. Well, how exactly does it do that, Right. How does it build communities? It's a bit like corporate partners, they tell everyone they're doing it, so it must be true,
Well, the big forces changing and driving change in the 21st century must be the rise of the economies of China and India and Southeast Asia.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is production. And it's also producing huge amounts of CO2, and they're doing nothing to reduce the CO2 they're producing. That is completely aside, yet we're told that, global warming is a problem. But, the changing shape of the world is driven primarily by that. And, of course, the resources and gathering resources needed to continue this sort of industrialisation and the creation of fake absence of resources and so forth. But, the economic driver is, I think, what I said. Their drivers, like concern about global warming or whatever, are just fake news things to corral people into a certain way of thinking.
Well, it's consensus propaganda, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is from the Law Gazette. We're going to finish off with this, actually. It says, MPs say that individuals with a grievance against banks have been blocked from reporting concerns by oppressive legal agreements. Now, it says solicitors are helping banks to conceal potential criminal activity through onerous gagging clauses. This is from the Law Gazette, by the way. Wow. A parliamentary debate has heard this, right? MPs told a Westminster Hall debate last week that individuals with a grievance against banks have been blocked from reporting concerns to regulators or the police by oppressive legal agreements.
Really?
The debate heard claims that banks have broken up businesses and destroyed livelihoods by acts of deliberate deception and fraud, systematic asset stripping and inflated charges and fees. Attention then turned to lawyers' involvement when MPs discussed why so little has been done to curb or punish such behaviour. Now, for this even to get into Parliament is a big deal because property has been stolen on a mass scale for years in this country, and we've been covering it. We've covered how it works through the county court and how it's done. The masters in the Royal Courts of Justice know this is happening, and they tell you at all costs to get these claims out of county court. If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, it's basically where you get a debt collection company that has a legally qualified person who basically manifest themselves as a group of solicitors who go to the county court, get an order which is generated within the court from people who work inside the court for private bailiff companies, and often there's never a warrant of restitution, how it should be done in equity. So basically, you've got these companies like Marston's who are complicit in stealing people's property, and that's exactly what they're talking about here, right? They're talking about this kind of thing because, all right, we're talking about banks, but the result of the debts being made up, basically, in a lot of cases, is what this is about. It says, in essence, they are bullying victims into silence and preventing them from discussing their cases with those who are there to protect them. He added that the Solicitors Regulation Authority should issue very firm guidance to prevent solicitors from contractually silencing allegations of criminal conduct. William Ragg said lawyers, he's a Conservative MP, I think, said lawyers had been complicit in a witch hunt to silence whistleblowers trying to expose misconduct by the banks. He noted that one bank sent a top partner from one of the country's best regarded law firms to a hearing in a Cambridge County Court for a case involving two people who had highlighted misconduct. Now, this is very interesting because it confirms what we've been covering for years, the theft of property through the county court, as I was just saying, with the assistance of certain judges. I'm not saying all judges are involved in this, but I know for a fact there's certain judges within the county court who are facilitating this on behalf of private and government interests, and it's a very, very serious issue, and something that I will be talking about in Lytham St Anne's on Monday the 19th of November. And also we'll be talking about the bigger picture on Saturday the 18th, all day, again in Lytham St Anne's New Horizons. Lytham St Anne's New Horizons, just look that up or go to windowsontheworld.net and it's on the opening page. So
Fantastic.
I'm just going to read out something that Osteo said here. Germany's green government advisors admit frankly that decarbonisation can only be achieved by the limitation of democracy, both nationally and internationally. Now, that's quite a common kind of quote for these people,
yes.
isn't it? That we've come out with quotes like this before. Basically, they want to limit all of your rights on the back of this monumental lie. Now, this has happened in history before, hasn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, usually monumental lies are used to limit democracy. I mean, here you see we have this global warming, European Union stuff all sort of uniting together, and if you don't believe one, then you're called a denier or something. But they make these narratives to support themselves, and they're trying to corral people into a raft of false narratives. And on the back of that, you see, once you've got a lot of people agreeing a false narrative, you can then impose things upon others. So you call for trials against climate change deniers, for example. And I dare say, well, there's many things they'd like to attack people on. But right now, climate change is used as a big thing to regiment people down a false narrative corridor.
That's why we cover it quite a lot, and it's hard to actually not cover it because it seems to be the driving force of what's going on. I was
the excuse for many things.
At our show tonight, Climate Conference Banned Climate Conference Goes Ahead, it's called. Banned Climate Conference Goes Ahead. And there's some amazing quotes in there. And if you want to see how this scientific consensus works, and I know Martin does, because he was there, he was at the conference, he filmed it, that's where we met. It's Martin who's in chat tonight. And it's such an important thing because even now people are commenting on it and they're absolutely blown away by the information in that, because it just proves that the narrative is being utterly controlled, and it's being controlled for a purpose. And to me, that's one of the most important things. So we do cover that climate change thing quite a lot. And what I like to do is put it into the bigger picture, the bigger perspective, which is what our talks are all about. So if you'd like to book one of our talks, do get in touch through the website. We have got people actually arranging them now up and down the country, which is great. And I'd like to thank Stephen O'Neill again, because I forgot to thank him actually after the week after we did the talk there in Bristol. But that was a very successful day, and we are getting inquiries from that at the moment. So in conclusion, Mr. Corbyn, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, forward to accountability and evidence-based policy and science.
Yeah, we do talk about this a lot, don't we? And the thing is, when the narrative is controlled at every single level as it is, then it's only the people who can see outside of it that are actually going to make a difference. And that's quite important now, isn't it?
Well, it is. And I ask myself sometimes, is the narrative controlled more now than it used to be in the past? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think so. I mean, when you read George Orwell's 1984 book and you see it happening now, you think, my God, I would never have thought it could happen on the scale it does. But a lot of people who are victims of this, prisoners of false narratives, of course, don't know that they're prisoners of a false narrative. So our task, and the task of people who understand, is to somehow get the message across. And that involves meetings, conversations, but it also involves building alternative media in a way which has never been built before, because the mainstream media now is just 100% committed to corralling people down a false narrative.
Yeah, and that's why the term fake news has kind of blown it all apart, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think fake news is a great phrase, and it's something they're really scared of. Well, I use it quite a lot in my Twitter accounts, Piers_Corbyn, by the way, if you don't know. But I use fake news, fake science, fake this and that, because they do hang together.
Well, I think it's the way of kind of getting the upper hand with propagandists, because when you have to throw it back, because what propagandists do is they mirror, they reverse back at you what they're doing themselves.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most common things, and a bit of what this show's been about tonight, really. Just in conclusion, Osteo says carbon credit currency on the blockchain with a global carbon tax coming soon. Well, we already have a global carbon tax, don't we?
We do.
It's on
your electricity bill.
And your car tax. Your car tax.
Absolutely.
Everything you do. We pay 80% tax. We're paupers. We're slaves. You know, the main thing is as well, if you actually say this to anyone, they go, well, I pay my taxes and I'm proud of it. Well, keep doing it then, keep doing it. If it works, carry on. So,
well, I mean, there's national insurance, that's fine as a tax. But look, the super tax we pay on energy and now on housing is utterly monstrous. I mean, they're just profits and super profits for the biggest corporations in the world. I mean, the super rich people around didn't get rich by working. They got rich by robbing.
Well, yes, and that's another story, and a big one, and probably the most important one, and they're still at it. And the latest thing is the climate's changing. That's it from this week. For this week, from Piers Corbyn and myself. We'll be back next week at the same time. Thanks for listening, everybody, and see you soon on the Bigger Picture Tour.
Good one.